Welcome back to Royal Vault UK, where quiet whispers disputed accounts, and the monarchy's most controversial secrets are examined with clarity and respect. But tonight, we begin with a question many royal watchers have never dared to ask. Was the public wrong about who truly fractured the royal family? Unverified reports from Windsor now suggest that the real breaking point may not have come from Harry's departure, but from a private confrontation involving the king himself. Today, we explore a rumored argument that some insiders claim was quietly erased from the official narrative, a moment so tense that it allegedly reshaped alliances inside Buckingham Palace. At the center of these conflicting whispers stand two figures: King Charles, burdened by legacy, and a senior royal whose reaction some say changed everything. If even a fraction of these accounts is true, the story the public believed for years may have been built on the wrong assumptions, and the royal divide may have begun much closer to the throne than anyone realized. The roots of this disputed tension trace back to the final months of Queen Elizabeth's reign, a period some insiders quietly describe as far more turbulent than the public ever knew. While the world saw a united front, whispers inside the palace told a different story: a monarch preparing for transition, a family struggling with shifting roles, and unspoken resentment rising beneath the surface. For decades, King Charles carried the image of a future sovereign shaped by duty, patience, and restraint. Yet those closer to the family insist his private frustrations had been quietly accumulating for years. The pressures of succession, the growing divide between his sons, the public's unwavering comparisons to the late queen, all of it, some say, formed the backdrop of an emotional climate more fragile than the palace ever admitted. Meanwhile, a senior royal long believed to be one of the king's closest confidants had begun drifting into a different ideological camp, one rooted in tradition, continuity, and loyalty to the late queen's legacy. According to unverified accounts, this subtle divergence created a tension that slowly widened behind closed doors, even as the family maintained a polished facade before the world. Inside the grand halls of Windsor and the private drawing rooms of Buckingham Palace, conversations reportedly grew sharper. Questions over responsibility, conflicting visions for the future, unspoken grievances from past decisions. All of these insiders claim began quietly colliding in the months leading up to the rumored confrontation. And it is here, in this uneasy transition between the old monarchy and the new, that the alleged divide began to deepen. Some say the seeds of the confrontation were planted long before the moment itself, hidden in unresolved tensions that neither side dared to address publicly. This is where the controversy truly begins. According to palace insiders, the confrontation began on a quiet afternoon inside one of Buckingham Palace's most private rooms, a space traditionally reserved for delicate discussions the public would never hear about. The official record makes no mention of what happened that day. But disputed accounts circulating among those close to the royal household paint a far more dramatic picture. Some sources claim the king entered the room intending to resolve months of growing tension. Others insist the meeting was never meant to become emotional, that it was supposed to be a routine conversation about royal duties schedules and future plans for the monarchy. But whatever the intention, whispers suggest the exchange quickly spiraled into something far more heated. One unverified account describes the atmosphere as icy from the moment they sat down. The king allegedly raised concerns about loyalty and unity, speaking with a tone sharper than those present had ever heard from him. The senior royal, someone long regarded as steadfast and unshakable, reportedly responded with equal firmness, challenging decisions that they believed drifted too far from the late queen's principles. Some insiders claim voices were raised. Others deny any shouting and insist the confrontation was cold, controlled, and dangerously quiet, the kind of silence that carries more weight than anger. But nearly all versions of the story agree on one detail. For the first time in years, King Charles and this senior royal found themselves facing each other not as allies, but as opponents. One disputed account alleges that the king accused them of undermining his efforts to modernize the monarchy. A counter-version insists the senior royal accused the king of abandoning commitments made to the late queen, commitments the public never knew existed. There is even a whispered claim that the conversation drifted toward the topic of succession reopening emotional wounds that many believed had healed long ago. As tensions mounted, those outside the room reportedly noticed a shift in the atmosphere. A long-standing aide later described the moment anonymously as a fracture forming in real time, a quiet, devastating line drawn between past and present. Some say the confrontation ended abruptly, with the senior royal leaving the room first, their expression unreadable. Others insist the king walked out, choosing silence over escalation. What happened next remains disputed. Some claim the royal household went into immediate damage control. Others believe nothing was done, that the family simply allowed the divide to take root, hoping time would smooth over what had been said. But time did not smooth it over. Rumors suggest the effects were felt instantly. Subtle changes in schedules, reduced joint appearances, and a noticeable cooling in the once familiar warmth between the two households. Supporters of the king quietly argue he finally stood up for the vision he believed in. Critics insist the senior royal was the only one brave enough to defend the late queen's legacy. And a third group claims the truth is far more complicated, that neither was entirely right or entirely wrong. But one thing is consistent across nearly every insider whisper. This confrontation marked the beginning of a divide that would soon ripple through the rest of the family, and eventually split the royal household in two. In the days following the rumored confrontation, the royal household reportedly entered a period of quiet recalibration. No public statements were issued, no official acknowledgments made, but subtle signs, insiders claim, began to expose the fracture beneath the surface. According to those familiar with the inner workings of the palace, King Charles was said to be torn between two competing instincts. On one side was his lifelong commitment to unity, the desire to preserve a monarchy already under intense public scrutiny. On the other was a growing conviction that the palace could no longer operate under the shadow of the past, that decisive action was necessary, even if it risked upsetting long-standing relationships. Some palace aides quietly insist the king spent several days reflecting on what had been said, becoming unusually withdrawn during private engagements. They describe him as conflicted, thoughtful, and perhaps even regretful. Yet others argue he felt justified, that he believed the confrontation was overdue. A necessary challenge to an outdated mindset rooted in tradition rather than progress. The senior royal, meanwhile, was reportedly just as shaken. Sources close to their household claim they viewed the confrontation not as a disagreement, but as an alarming sign that the new reign would drift away from the foundations laid by the late queen. To them, the argument was not personal, it was philosophical, a clash between duty as they understood it and the shifting priorities of a modern monarchy. Public reaction, though muted by a lack of concrete details, reflected this divide. Among supporters of Charles, the confrontation was interpreted as a bold step. A monarch finally asserting his authority after decades waiting in the wings. Among traditionalists, however, whispers suggested the senior royal had been the true guardian of continuity, and that their resistance was an act of loyalty, not defiance. This divide, though quiet, grew stronger with each rumor that surfaced. Some commentators began to speculate whether the monarchy was entering a new identity crisis, one shaped not by external pressure, but by internal conflict between vision and legacy. And beneath all this tension lies a deeper question, one that scholars of the crown have quietly debated for years. Is the strength of the monarchy rooted in unity, or in the ability to confront uncomfortable truths behind closed doors? The aftermath of the rumored confrontation suggests a more complicated reality. Not all disagreements weaken an institution. Not all unity is genuine. And in the royal family, where image, duty, and emotion intertwine, the line between loyalty and dissent is often blurred beyond recognition. But according to those who observed this shift up close, the most striking consequence was not the argument itself. It was what came after. A subtle reorganization of roles, a noticeable distance during public events, and a growing sense that the divide did not merely affect two individuals, it reshaped the entire dynamic of the monarchy moving forward. For some, this was the moment the royal family split in two. For others, it was the moment the truth finally surfaced. In the silent hours that followed the rumored confrontation, those close to the royal family quietly noted a shift, subtle, unspoken, yet unmistakable. It marked the beginning of a new chapter for the monarchy, a chapter defined not by ceremony or tradition, but by the fragile balance between truth perception and the heavy weight of legacy. The corridors of Buckingham Palace have seen centuries of conflict, reconciliation, and unspoken compromise. Yet rarely has a moment whispered disputed, never officially acknowledged, carried such symbolic power. For some, it represented a necessary reckoning, a sign that the new reign would not be shaped by fear of friction. For others, it was a sorrowful signal that the unity once cherished under the late Queen was beginning to fracture in ways the public was never meant to see. But perhaps the most compelling truth is this. In a family built on symbolism, silence is often louder than any declaration. Alliances shift quietly, loyalties evolve without announcement, and behind the gilded doors, the story of the monarchy is rarely the story the world thinks it knows. Whether this rumored confrontation was a moment of honesty or the beginning of a deeper divide remains a question only those inside the palace can answer. And until they do, the public is left to interpret the whispers, to connect the subtle changes, the cooled glances, the rare moments when old warmth seems missing. But the story does not end here. If the tensions suggested by these unverified accounts continue to unfold, the next chapter may reveal a version of the royal family that challenges everything Britain believes about loyalty, tradition, and power. For viewers who wish to follow this evolving mystery, remember to like, share, and subscribe to Royal Vault UK, your window into the crown's most disputed stories past and present. There are secrets still waiting, and many believe the most consequential ones have yet to surface.